Hey y'all, today I'll be setting up my Neovim config from scratch. This is the current Neovim setup that I use daily for programming. I'll try my best to explain the configuration because I know there are some people who are still getting into Neovim. Hopefully this will help those of you get a glimpse on everything. With that said, all the configurations you see in this video is available at my .files in my Neovim repo. So feel free to use it as a reference point. If you are new, I suggest you watch this first so you have some idea on how and where you would go about changing things, or maybe even set it up on your own. I always love keeping up and staying ahead of the curve no matter what I do, especially when it comes to things that I have to deal with every day. If you can relate, Skillshare is this really awesome online learning platform where you can build up your creative skills or explore new hobbies in all kinds of fields that actually fit you. You get to learn from people who really know their stuff. They've got so many lessons and classes and actual projects to help you get your hands on right away. You can share the projects that you did or look at the projects from other students and maybe come up with better ones. They even have a class about how to use AI effectively and correctly, and I think it's really important these days. And what better way to learn than to put those skills into work? They even give you some resources to do the projects, and as they say, learning actually never really ends. And guess what? The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. And thank you Skillshare again for sponsoring this video. Now back to the Neovim config. The terminal that I'm using is Ghosty, and there are certain settings that I have inside of Ghosty, for example like the background color or the background opacity, that will have some effect on the Neovim color scheme. So I just want to make sure I get that out there first. And because Neovim runs inside a terminal, you can use pretty much any terminal emulator you want. But with my config, it would be better to have a terminal that supports image rendering. If you haven't already installed Neovim, because I'm on a Mac, I'm going to use brew to install Neovim with brew install Neovim. And my Neovim version is currently at 0.11, so that is like the latest version at the moment. And if you installed it with Homebrew, you can also check where the path is just to make sure it is installed correctly. Now, if I navigate into the .config and go into my nvim directory, this directory is where all your nvim configurations will go into. For your case, it should also be called as nvim, but for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to call this as nvim scratch. Because I'm going to use lazyvim, this is how our folder structure is going to look like. So we have the parent directory as nvim scratch, but for your case, remember it's just going to be nvim, and then we'll have the after directory, an init.lua file, and then a lua directory that holds another directory called sethi. And in this case, you don't necessarily need to add a directory that has your name in it. I'm just doing this for my case. And then inside sethi, we have the core directory and then a lazy.lua file, which I'll get into later. And then we have the plugins directory. The lazy log file will automatically be generated once we set up lazy, so we can just ignore the lazy files for now. So these are just the basic file structure that we're going to be working with. If you don't know what lazy is a fast plugin manager that builds on top of Neovim. So lazy can be very powerful right out of the box with some great defaults and key bindings, but that does not matter because we'll be doing everything from scratch here. I'm going to just create a init.lua file and then create a folder called after. So now we have the init.lua file and the directory after. And I'll talk about the after directory later, but we're going to go ahead and create another directory called lua. We should now have at least 3 things in here, so that is the after, the init.lua, and the lua directory. Now before we spend any more time in the terminal, let's just actually go inside Neovim. For my case, I'm going to run nvim scratch and then dot to go inside. So for your case, you would do nvim dot. Now we are actually inside Neovim. I can then use J and K to navigate up and down to select the directory or the file. If you're not used to J and K yet, it's fine. You can use the arrow keys. And then I'm just going to navigate into the lua directory by pressing enter. Now I'm going to go ahead and create a directory by pressing D. And then I'm just going to call this sethi. You don't have to do this. I just prefer to have it structured this way. You could just skip the step of creating the folder called sethi or whatever your name is and just go straight to the next one. I'm going to navigate into the sethi directory And then I'm going to create a directory for where all my base key bindings and options, default options for the editor is going to stay at. So you could call these core settings, or you can maybe even call it defaults, call it whatever you like. Just make sure that you know what this directory is for. So I'm going to name it core and navigate inside the core directory. Now I'm going to create a file with the %sign and then enter the file name called options.lua and then press enter. I'm going to go ahead and save the file with :w first so that it knows that this file is being created as an empty file. Then back to the file explorer with :ex, and then we're going to create another file, so %sign, and then we're going to name this keymaps.lua. Go ahead and press enter. And again, we're just going to run :w to just save this file. In the default netrw, the file explorer, the way to create file is by pressing the %sign. We will change that later, so for now, just know that creating a file is using a %sign and creating directory with D. Open the file explorer with :EX. Now we will start navigating back, so just move up to the 2 dots and then go all the way back to our first directory. And now we're going to go into the init.lua file, the first one that we created. And in here, we're going to start requiring some things for Neovim to start running our files. So this is what we're going to do first. We're just going to type require sethi.core. So what this essentially does is we're actually telling Neovim that we're going to be calling the file from the directory sethi and then inside the directory called core. So it's almost like a path. Now I'm just going to quit and restart Neovim, and then you'll see that we have an error, which is kind of expected because we haven't actually called the options and keymaps file to work outside of the core directory. So what we need to do is navigate back into the core directory, then %sign to create a file called init.lua. Press enter, and now we're going to require the options and the keymaps file from in here. So remember the path, we're going to do sethi.core and then .options, and that should be it. And then we should do the same for the keymaps as well. And that should pretty much fix our issue. Save the file with :w and then quit with :wq. Now we reopen Neovim and there's no more error. What we basically did was in our first init.lua file, we told Neovim to require the core directory. And then inside the core directory, we had 2 files that we need. So we had to require those files in there one more time before this starts to function the way it should. Now, before we move any further, if you feel like you don't understand how to save a file or how to quit Neovim, I suggest you open up some sort of Vimmotion cheat sheet right next to you just to help you get going through setting up the configurations. You don't have to know any detail about that just yet at this point. Just knowing how to save a file, how to quit, how to save all file and quit at the same time. I'll leave it up on the screen so you can just take a screenshot and then just move on. Now I'm going to navigate into the options.lua file, and then we're going to start adding some settings for our editor. The first one is disabling the banner for our file explorer, but it doesn't really matter because we're not going to be using this file explorer for very long. So we're just going to set the netrw banner to 0. Next, we're going to go ahead and change the cursor behavior. So our cursor is going to be a block cursor instead. That's just how I prefer it. And the next one is that we're going to enable the absolute line numbers, and also we're going to enable the relative line numbers. When it comes to tabs and indentation, I like to have my tabs at 4. So we're going to set the tab stop to 4. And also the soft tab stop to 4. And also the shift width will also be 4. I also like to have expand tab set to true. This basically just convert tabs into spaces. My auto indent set to true. This just auto indents new lines to the same indentation as the previous line. And then we also have the smart indentation on. And I don't use wrap, so that's a false. Now let's try to save it with :w. And then we should actually see the changes happening once we source this whole buffer. And we can do that with :source and then %. For these options, you can just quickly run the :source % to reload the buffer and see the changes in real time. We have swap file at false. I have the backup set to false. And the next one is undo file. So this enables persistent undo. So you can undo the changes even after restarting Neovim. Go ahead and save that with :w. And then we're going to try running source % to make this buffer reload. Now when it comes to the search settings, I have the incremental search set to true, and then we also have the incremental command as split, and then ignore case I have that set to true, and smart case also set to true. Unless the search includes capital letters, then the case matters. Now it comes to the UI and visuals. So the first one I have is the term GUI colors, and that's always going to be true. We also have the background set to dark, and the next one I have is the scroll off at about 8. Keeps at least 8 lines of padding above and below the cursor when scrolling. And the next one is sign column as yes. So this will always show me the sign columns such as the git, diagnostics, and so on. And then I have some backspace behavior. So this allows backspace over the start of insert, end of the line, and indents. So just a little bit smoother when you edit. And then the splits behavior is set to true. So we have one for the right. So that's basically like the vertical. And of course, we need to have the split below for the horizontal. And there are just a few more things that I like to have in my config. You don't actually need to add all these. So these would just be kind of personal preference. So the first one is sort of like it allows at in the file's name, so like the most uncommon file names to show up. Yeah, the next one is the update time, which for cursor hold events and things like LSP is just going to be a bit faster. And the next one is color column set to 80. And the system clipboard access so that you can copy and paste between Neovim and other apps. Next is the highlight search. So when you search something in Neovim, it highlights that text as well. And next up is basically the mouse support in all modes, including clicking, selecting, and things like that. Lastly, we have the vim.editor config. Just enables the consistent coding styles across editors. Save that, and we should be done with the options. Navigating into Keymaps.lua, the first thing we're going to set is the local options. So this is just a local variable for the option setting that we're going to set, just for no recursive mapping and silent command messages. And the next one we're going to set are the global and the local leader key to space. So these act as prefixes for custom shortcuts. Next, we're going to set up the move line visually with capital J and capital K. So this essentially just allows us to select a line and then move it up and down. And this also works with code blocks. So if we go ahead and source % this really quickly, you can see that it now works as we expect it to. This joins the current line with the one below, keeping the cursor in place. So I use that as capital J. I think this is already set as a default in Neovim, so you don't actually need to add this anymore. But if it doesn't work for you, then just go ahead and add it. This one scrolls half the page down and centers the cursor vertically, and then we're also going to set for the one that does the same thing but just scrolls up instead. I also use N to jump to the next search result and keep the result centered when you open any folds, and also capital N to go previous in the search result. If we take a look at the example right now, we don't have this centered yet, so every search result I jump to, the cursor just goes everywhere. So if I go ahead and source this right now and we try it again, we should see that the cursor is now being centered properly every time we move with N to the next and capital N to the previous. Then this one is the indentation in visual mode. So this allows me to just select a single line or multiple lines and then move them with the lesser than or greater than key without having to reselecting the lines visually every single time. If I source this file really quickly, we should actually be able to see the difference. So if I select this line and move out with the greater than sign, and then I can just spam lesser than to move back in. So that is way easier than reselecting it over and over again. For this line, when we are in visual mode, we can paste over selection without losing our clipboard content. The next one prevents pasting from replacing your clipboard in visual mode. This line deletes without copying, so I use leader D for that. It keeps my clipboard really clean, so I like just having an option to do that. I also like to exit insert mode with Control C. And then we also have the in normal mode, we have Control C that clears the search highlights. So what happens is when I search for the word, for example, Vim, and if I want to clear this highlight, I have to type :no highlight, and then it goes away. If I source this really quickly, I can now just search for any word I want, and then it highlights, but when I Control C out of it, it just disappears. I also have leader F for code formatting, but this requires LSP to work properly. So for now, we're just going to add this. It won't work as of yet. Next, I just have capital Q disabled because I sometimes hit it on accident and it just puts me in this command line interface that I don't want inside of Vim. So I just disabled it. This next line allows me to use X to delete a certain character without having it copy to clipboard. I also have leader S for the global word replace, which starts a search and replace for word under your cursor across the whole file. Now, if I quickly source this and try to do leader S, I can change all the instances of word description in this buffer that I'm currently in right now. I also have leader X set up. When I'm running a script inside Neovim, I can actually just use leader X to execute that script without having to leave Neovim into the terminal at all. Next up is the highlighting the yanked text or the copied text, and this only runs after the text is being copied. So if I source and then try to yank, it should highlight. Next up are the keymaps for the tabs. I don't really use this that much, but we have leader TO for opening a new tab, leader TX for closing a tab, TN for going to the next tab, TP for going to the previous one, and then the TF to create the current tab in any one. Then we have the split tab controls, which is leader SV for vertical split, SH for horizontal, leader SE just makes the split equal, and then SX just closes the current split. Finally, we have leader FP, which copies the file path to clipboard. So we're just going to source this and then save this whole thing, and then we can move on to setting up lazy. Back in our file explorer, we're now going to create a new directory called plugin. So I'm going to do that with D, and then I'm going to name this plugins. And next we're going to do a %sign and create a lazy.lua file. I'm going to add the lazy config that you can find in their GitHub repository, and this should just be the normal default lazy setup. The first line sets the path where lazy nvim will be installed, and then it goes ahead and check if lazyvim is installed. If not, then it clones lazyvim. We also add lazyvim to the runtime path. Down here is just the lazy setup to check for auto plugin updates, and I have some disabled notifications when updates are found, and also when the plugin config changes, the notification will be disabled. If we go ahead and take a look at our file explorer, we'll see that we have the plugins directory that we created. But now what we need to do is we need to also tell lazy to look for this plugins folder, or else our plugins that we add won't work either. So what we're going to do now is go into the lazy.lua, and now I'm just going to add sethi.plugins here. This tells lazy to look for a Lua file inside the plugins directory. Opening up our file explorer, now I'm going to navigate into the plugins directory, and I'm going to start adding the plugins into here. Let me just quit and restart Neovim just in case. And then we're going to navigate back into Neovim and go into our plugins directory. The first one we're going to add is color schemes. So %sign to create that file, and color scheme.lua, press enter. And now we should be inside an empty file. Now I'm just going to add the color schemes that I have for my Neovim config. If you want to use any of these themes, you can always find them in my .files repo in the Neovim directory in colorscheme.lua file. And now I'm just going to uncomment this line to activate one of the color schemes as a permanent one. So I'm going to quit and restart Neovim. And of course, it doesn't work yet because we didn't require lazy in our main init.lua file just yet. We just created a lazy.lua file, but we forgot to add it inside the init.lua. Navigating into our main init.lua file, so all I need to do is require sethi.lazy. I'm going to save and quit with :wq and then restart Neovim, and we should see that the lazy UI is actually cloning all the color schemes that we added, because these color schemes are basically plugins from different repositories, and the rose pine theme is now being applied. When it comes to my color scheme, each and every one of these color schemes that I have set up here, I've made some slight tweaks to them, so the color might not be as accurate as the default colors, but the important thing is that I have them all set to transparent. So if you somehow are using transparent, then these themes should just work right off the back, because each of these options, for example, has the transparency set to true. Even for the groove box, I have transparent mode set to true. And the way I use my color scheme is that if we go to my terminal configurations, my default background is basically set to black. And then my terminal transparency mode is kind of on at the moment. So if I don't want to use transparency, then I can go ahead and just comment these lines out, save this, and then restart my terminal. So for example, if you're using Westterm, you would change the color and background of Westterm, and then it should reflect straight into your Neovim. As you can see, it goes back to the black background that I have set. Now, if you, for example, want to use the background color of a specific theme, if you don't want to use a custom terminal background color, then you would turn off the transparency mode for the specific background that you want to use. So here, I'm just going to turn off the transparency for Rose Pine. And I'm also going to set my highlight groups for the normal background to I'm just going to remove this line. And then that should allow us to basically have the default Rose Pine background color. This will go the same for every single theme here, but it's just that the variable names and the options might be a little bit different for each of them because they're made by different people. So just keep that in mind. So if we go ahead and restart Neovim really quickly, you'll see that I now have the default Rose Pine. So that is how you would go about changing the background color. I just want to get that out there first so you understand how the color scheme and everything works with the terminal. Alright, so now I'm going to start adding the automatic pairings for all sorts of brackets and quotation marks. Navigating back to our plugins directory, so we're going to do %sign and create a file name called autopairs.lua. And then we're just going to return this whole thing. So let's start by adding the plugin repo. This line then tells Neovim to only load this plugin when we go into insert mode. nvim autopairs also requires a dependency. So we're going to add a dependency called Neovim completion or nvim-cmp. Next, we're just going to create a function, and then this will apply for most of the plugins. Next, we're going to create a variable to store and load nvim autopairs. And we call the setup function with the autopairs.setup. This line enables Treesitter support for smarter pairings, which we will add as a plugin later. Here we customize the Treesitter behavior for specific languages. For Lua, the pairings is enabled inside the string, JS enabled inside template strings, and for Java, it's just disabled. This next line requires the module that integrates Neovim autopairs with nvim-cmp and then store it in a variable. And then we also have to load the nvim completion plugin itself. So we're just going to change that to comp and then require the comp. Finally, this line sets up the event listener for when a completion item is confirmed and decides whether to insert matching brackets or code. Now I'm just going to save and quit all and then restart Neovim. And we can see that the lazy UI is installing to the plugins that we have just added. So now if we navigate back to the autopairs.lua, so let's try it out by writing a function, and it should automatically close the bracket. And you can see for other brackets, it completes it as well. For whatever parentheses or quotes that you add, it will auto-complete them for you. Now, if we go ahead and go back to our file explorer, we are going to now add another file explorer as a plugin, so we no longer need to use :ex. This plugin is called Oil, and this really helps with navigating the file in Neovim, and it is one of my favorite plugins, especially when it comes to file explorer. So I'm going to hit %sign to create a file called oil.lua and then save this empty file. We then return the whole thing and add the plugin repo. This line adds nvim web icons as dependency for displaying the file icons, and then we're just going to set up the function like all the other plugins, and inside this function we are going to import and run the setup function to configure Oil. This line tells Neovim to use Oil as the default file explorer. This lets you customize the columns in Oil, but I'm going to leave it empty. Here we change some default key bindings for Oil. So I have Control H disabled, and then I also have Control C disabled. These are default key bindings for quitting Oil, because sometimes I spam C a lot and it accidentally quits Oil. So I just had this disabled. You might not want this. And then I also mapped the Alt H to open the selected file in the new horizontal split. And because I disabled Control C to exit oil, I just prefer to use Q instead. And also, I think I wrote actions wrong. It's supposed to have S at the end. So that is that. This next line makes sure the files you deleted from your Explorer goes to your trash. And then we have view options set to true to show all the hidden files, and skip confirmation just doesn't prompt you to confirm for simple edits in your file explorer. Now we are going to add the keymaps to activate the oil explorer. So we can do vim.keymap.set, and in normal mode we're going to take the command as a dash. So that is going to be the command to activate our oil explorer. I'm also going to add another key binding for opening the file explorer, but it's going to open in a floating window instead. So we're going to do that as leader dash. And then we need to change the command to require oil and then go .toggle float, as that function will run the toggle floating file explorer. I'm going to save this, and then instead of quitting and restarting Neovim, I'm just going to type :lazy, and it should open up the lazy UI, and you can see that we have 2 plugins not installed. So by pressing capital I, we can also install those plugins from in here. Now, just to make sure, I'm going to restart Neovim again and then go back into our oil and see if everything works as we expected. So if I go dash, that opens up oil. Okay, I can use JNK to navigate between my directories. So everything seems to work fine. And if I go leader dash, that should open up a file explorer in a floating window, and Q to quit. I'm also going to add a line highlight in the file explorer, so it's actually a bit easier to navigate between those files and see where we are at, and save it. And then we can try and reload this plugin by doing :lazy reload and go oil.nvim. Press enter and our plugin should now be reloaded. So as you can see, we now have the color highlights for lines that we are in. So a little demonstration of how the oil file explorer works. So we no longer need to use %sign to create a file. You can think of oil as like an editor, but for file explorer. So to create a file, you just create a new line like you would in Neovim, and then just type something like go.text, and we just save it, and that counts as creating a new file. If we want to create a directory, the same thing, we can just go here, create a new line, random with a slash, and then we just need to save it, and then that counts as a directory. If we want to delete something, we just delete it and just save it, and it asks us if we want to delete that. So yes, and then that directory is deleted. Same thing for file. Even renaming files, we can just edit like we do normal text and then just save it, and everything should just be the same. We can also undo things in here. If we want to move files, all we basically do is just copy and paste the file back and forth, save it. So this is what I like about oil. It is just so simple to use. Before we move on to setting up the next plugin, I'm going to quickly disable transparency first so that it's easier for you guys to see the text. Okay, we should be good now. So the next plugin we're going to add is Snacks. If you don't know, Snacks is a collection of Neovim plugins and some other really good things you can add, and it just improves an overall quality of life for Neovim. So for Snacks, I'm just going to create a new file called snacks.lua. We're going to save that, and we're going to go inside the Snacks. The first thing we're going to do is just return this whole thing like we did before. And then in here, we're going to make an object, and then we're going to require the folky snacks.nvim. And we're going to set the priority to 1000 and lazy to false. Now the next thing we need to add for Snacks are the key bindings and the options. We'll come to the options section later. For now, let's just add the key bindings. In Snacks, the way you actually make anything work is you add a key binding, and Snack has a specific function that you can call with your keybind to run those actions. So what I can do is go like this and create a key object. And then I'm going to add the things I want in here, and then we'll go through them together. So the first one I have here is lazygit. So basically I have this keybind to leader lg. So I don't have to go into the plugin section and then just add a separate lazygit file now. I can just use Snack to call lazygit from in here. If you don't already have lazygit installed into your system, then you can go ahead and install it first before setting up this plugin by doing brew install lazygit. So just make sure you have that installed in your system first. With that said, let me just save this and quit out of here. And then let me restart. And you can see that Snacks is directly being cloned into our Neovim. Now, if we navigate back to our plugins and go to Snacks, we should not be able to use all of these. So the next one we have is lazygit log, and this just shows up a git log using lazygit. So I can do that with leader gl. So let me show you the first one. So leader lg, that opens up lazygit, but because I'm not in a git repository, it doesn't show up. So I'm just gonna say no. Let me just go to a git repo, and then leader gl opens up this git log, and leader lg opens up lazygit. We'll get to that later. For now, let's just go through this. And we also have the file explorer with leader es, and that opens up the snack file explorer. And the next thing we have is leader r capital N. This just allows me to quickly rename a file that I'm in right now without having to open a file explorer and then change things from here. I can just do it right here with a keybind. So leader r capital N, and then let's change snacks to SS. Enter, and there you go. And the last one is just closing a buffer. So for example, if we just create a new file, save that, and go into that file, we can just close this buffer by doing leader D capital B, and then we're back here. Now I'm going to start adding the snack pickers. Let me just quit and restart Neovim. Okay, so the first one, leader PF, and that just allows me to find any single file that I have in this directory and go to those files. And leader PC just allows me to open up only the files for my Neovim configuration. Let's say I am in this repository. If I go leader PC, it just opens up the files that are inside the Neovim config folder. As you can see, we are in a totally different directory path, but the only thing we see here are the Neovim files and configurations. And leader PS is simple enough. It just finds the word through your whole file. For example, leader PS, and we can go vim.keymap maybe. And there you go. You can see a lot of these keymaps that we set are showing up. The next one is also grep word. So for example, I want to find the word function. So I can just select this whole thing, leader PWS, and then it just search for the word function throughout every single thing that I have. Leader PK to search for the keymaps, like for example, leader RN in normal mode as N. So you can go through them and check for the keymaps that you already have, so you don't accidentally overlap the keymap. So this is also a very great one to have. So next up, I'm going to add a git branches, like preview git branches with snack. Then snacks also have a theme functionality, so you can check your themes and see the real preview of them. But this doesn't actually stay persistent. At least I haven't found a way to make them persistent just yet. So this is just going to be for previews, but I do have another one that I'm going to use Telescope to do that will allow us to switch themes and allow the themes to be persistent even when we quit and reopen Neovim. And then we also have the leader VH. It just opens up a Vim documentation, and you can use the snack picker to find it, almost like Telescope. Let me just save and reopen Neovim, and we're gonna go to snacks with leader PF, come all the way down here. So let's try leader TH first, and as you can see, it goes through all the themes and preview the syntax highlightings, the color, and everything about it. Leader VH allows us to search for any help commands that we might want to know, maybe something like nvim-comp, nvim-ts. Yeah, you can see it's just the Vim documentation, and you can go through it, whatever it is that you want to search for. And you can just go in here, press enter, and start reading the documentation. A very good way to learn about Vim as well. And for the git branches, if we go to a different repo and do leader gbr, we can look through the branches and search for them as well. Now let's go add some of the options in here, and I won't go too deep into the options. If you want to know more about the options, you can check out this video on the top right where I go more in depth on snacks and many other plugins that improve Neovim quality of life. So I'm just going to go and set my options here. You can use mine as a reference, mess around with them, see which one you like more. You can also find the docs from here, so this will be the link to the GitHub. Now the first thing we're going to add is the Explorer. So what we can do is just explorer, just like that, and we're gonna write enabled equals true. So this allows us to just enable or disable something that we're gonna be using with Snack. So all of the options will pretty much have this. And next up, we're gonna change the layout to cycle equals false. And before we restart Neovim, this just allows our explorer to not like cycle like this, as you can see. Let's just move on. Next one is the quick file, and I'm going to enable equals true as well, and I'm going to exclude latex. Next up, we have the picker, which is basically our picker right here. So we're going to make some adjustment to that. We're going to go picker, and then we're going to do enable true. We're going to do matchers, frequency true. Next up, we're going to do formatters. File name first equals true. So this just basically puts the file name first when we search, and icon width. Next up, we have layout, and we're going to set the preset to the telescope. You can find this in their GitHub again at this link right here. And we are also going to turn the cycle equals false. And then we have another layout with an S this time. Select is going to be equal to the object, preview equals false, and another layout. These are just like the custom settings, and you can check out and read the docs again for more information about them. For now, I'm just going to go through them. After select, we have a telescope. So this basically sets the layout. I mean, it has 4 layouts or something. Like the first one was for the select, and the next one is for the telescope. And reverse is set to true. This means the search bar will be at the bottom instead. Some of you might like it on top, so just set that to false. And again, these are just some custom settings for the telescope layout. And the next one that I have is the IV layout. Same thing with the IV layout. You can go and mess around with these. And we're just going to save and reopen Neovim. Go back into our snacks. And then lastly, what we need to add is the dashboard. So I'm going to add a dashboard settings really quickly. Enabled as true. And these are just the sections and the settings for the dashboard with some command that is going to run an ASCII to image converter, which you need to have installed on your system. This is just the path to the profile picture. So we're going to save and quit with WQA. So that just saves and quit all, and open back up Neovim. And now to see if the dashboard is actually working, we're going to run nvim. And okay, it's working as we expected. There's also one more thing that we need to add, which is the snacks.image, which I will later on add in the video. You know what, actually, let me just add it right now. I'm just going to add it right above the dashboard. This is the section that I've just added, but we're just going to comment it out for now. We'll come back to this later because it requires some other plugin to make this work. So we're going to save and quit and restart Neovim again. Go back to snacks. Okay, we're all good. And that is snacks. With that done, let's just move on to the next plugin. The next thing we're going to add is the to-do comments, which goes really well with snacks. And I use this a lot, so let's set that up. And we're going to set the keys. If you don't know what this does, it basically just tells the plugin to lazy load when a file is being created. And then we have these 2 keys that we just added. Leader PT just lets us search through the to-do comments, and leader P capital T lets us search through a specific keyword. So let me just save and quit Neovim and then reopen it. You can see the to-do comments being cloned. Go to snacks. And then if we try to do leader PT, it should not work technically because we haven't actually set up the to-do comments as its own plugin. This is just a to-do comments integrated with snacks. So let's go ahead and set up to-do comments now. So we're just going to make a new file called to-do comments. And we're going to go in here and we're going to do the same thing. So return and then to-do comments.nvim. And we're going to do the same event. And next, we're going to add some dependencies. It requires nvim Plenary, so we're going to call that really quickly. And we're going to create a local variable called to-do comments. The only reason I'm creating a local variable because I'm just lazy to type require to-do comments all the time. So this should just help with that. And then we're going to do to-do comments.setup and keywords. All of these comments have their own icons and their own colors. You can go and change these to your likings. And then we are also going to set 2 key maps for these. So the first one, this just quickly allows me to jump to the next, and then this just lets me jump to the previous. And I'm just going to quit and restart Neovim. And you can see that Plenary is being installed as we added that as a dependency. And we're going to go to to-do. And now let's try this out. So for example, if I do a comment and do a to-do, okay, it's working. And let's try a fix me as well. Okay, nice. If you remember, we had that set up in snack as well. So if we go to snacks all the way down here, we have leader PT and leader P capital T. If we try to do that right now with leader PT, we can actually see all sort of different things that we have in our Neovim plugin right now that contain these comments. And we can jump between them, and they're in different files, and you can go straight to them by pressing enter. Let's try to go to a different file here, maybe this one. Yeah, as you can see, we have that set up already. And with leader P capital T, the way we have it set up is that it will look for these 3 keywords, which is the to-do, fix, and fix me. So with leader P capital T, it only opens up those keywords that are available right now. If we try to add more to-do comments, and we just go ahead and try to jump between them with open bracket T, open bracket T, open bracket T, close bracket T, close bracket T. So we just jump back and forth with the to-do comments only with these key maps that I have set here. Alright, so the next plugin we're going to add is another typical file explorer. But first, let me actually go to snacks and just remove the snacks file explorer because I don't think I'm going to be using that anymore. So let's just remove that and just remove this one as well. And then we're going to save it. Now this file explorer is called mini files. Let's create a file called mini.lua, save that. Go into here, save it again. Now we are going to return a table as usual. And then this line just calls the default mini.nvim. And then mini files is one of the modules in mini.nvim. So we need to call this first. We're now going to add mini.files, and then we call mini.files. Then we return a function. And then in here, we are going to require mini.files and add it to a variable. And then we're going to set up the configurations for mini files. These are just some key maps that I've changed for mini files. I will explain to you later. Let's just keep going first. Now I'm going to add a key binding to activate mini files. So I have this set to leader EE, and then I'm also going to add another key binding, which is leader EF. And let me just save this. And let's restart Neovim. Now let's navigate back to mini. Okay, so what I have set up here for the mappings is that I can actually navigate into the file with enter key or with the capital L key. So shift L to activate mini file. We can do leader EE to open up mini files, just like that. And we can press enter to go into the directory. We also have the go out as dash and then go out plus as capital H. So what that does is if we go to mini files and capital H just goes back. If we go into Lua with capital L, it opens up the next one. Capital L again goes in. We can also use enter if we like it. And to go back, we can just do capital H, or we can do dash to just navigate back. But it won't close the previous directory window, as you can see. The way mini files work is similar to oil. It's just in a different format. In case you run into big projects, you might need to look at the file structure. So this is what I use mini files for. And it just acts like an editor similar to oil. So if you want to create a new file, you can just create a new line. And let's do text.lua. And if we want to confirm save this, we can do the equal sign. And it will ask us if we want to create this file. So I'm just going to say no for now. And if you want to close out of this file explorer, all we need to do is press Q and we're out. This key binding, if we do leader EF, it opens me into where I'm currently at. And with that, we are done with mini files. Let's move on to the next one. Let's go back to the file explorer with dash. And this next one helps save and restore your editing sessions. So let's create a new file called autosessions.lua. Save that. Go into here, save it again. Now we're going to return the table as usual, and we're going to call the autosession. Now we're going to set up a function, and we're going to set a local variable called autosession, and then require autosession. Now we set up the auto session behavior. So we have the auto restore enabled as false because I don't want it to automatically restore sessions. I'd rather do that manually. So we'll set a keybind for the manual restoring. And we also have we're basically skipping, saving, or restoring sessions for these common directories. So your directory may vary. These are the key bindings that we are going to use for auto sessions. So the first one, manually restore our sessions with space WR. If you want to manually save our sessions, we can do that with leader WS. Let me save this and restart Neovim. Auto sessions being cloned. All right, let's go back to auto sessions. So let's just make a split screen and just go to maybe snacks. Okay, and now we're just going to save everything. And now we're going to quit out of Neovim again. And when we open it back up, if we do leader WR, it restores our session to where we were last at. Now let's try saving our sessions. So let's go to something else like mini. Then we can do leader WS to save session. And you can see on the bottom left, it says saved session. If we quit all and come back in, leader WR, it should open us back into the Neovim buffer. And let's move on. All right, next I'm going to set up telescope as there are still a few things that I use with telescope. So I'm going to go ahead and create a file called telescope.lua. Save that. And again, we are going to return a table and we are going to call telescope at this branch. And telescope requires a few dependencies for it to work properly. So I'm going to add them. The first one is Plenary. This one is the FZF sorter for telescope and it just improves the search performance. And then we also have the nvim dev icons. And lastly, we have the telescope themes that allows us to continuously preview themes and switch between our custom themes. So I'm going to call a function. We're going to require telescope and telescope actions and also telescope built-in. Next, we're going to enable the FZF and themes extensions that we declared earlier in our dependencies list. Then we're going to call our telescope.setup. And let's configure the telescope behavior. I'm going to add a default. The first one we're going to add is path display equals smart. The path display shortens the file path when it's safe to do so it keeps things clean. And then we have our mappings. So in insert mode, we're going to be able to use Control K and Control J to move up and down, selecting our options in the telescope. Now we're going to move on to the extensions. And the first one is themes. We're going to have enable previewer as true. Enable live preview also as true, and the persisting behavior as true. And this is basically the path for where our color scheme is located. If we look at our path, it's basically inside the Lua directory right here. So that's our path. Now let's add some key mappings for our telescope. So the first one is fuzzy find recent files with leader PR. This is leader P capital WS. This is similar to the one I have in snacks, which is leader PWS, but this one just search for the connected words under the cursor. And then lastly, I have the themes picker set to leader THS. So let's go ahead and save this now. Now we're going to run :lazy to open up the lazy UI. And if we move down, we should see that we have these three recognized but not installed. So what I can actually do is capital I to install that. Now that's done, we're gonna queue to quit out of here and :lazy, reload telescope, enter. If we go ahead and try out these key bindings, leader PR, this allows me to search through my recently opened files. And for this key binding, if we, for example, take our cursor under the enable live preview here and we run the key bind, you can see that it searches for only those words right here. Leader THS, to select our theme, we can use Control K and Control J to move around and select the theme we want. But if you want to preview the themes, you need to use the arrow keys, as that is the plugin limitation. So if we use the arrow keys, we can see it instantly switch. So for example, if we choose Groovebox, press enter. This is basically our custom Groovebox that we made in colorschemes.lua. Now, if we try to quit out of here and see if it's persistent, and we come back in, it's probably not going to be persistent. It just goes back to Rose Pine. because if we go back to color scheme.lua, we can see that we still have this option available here. This one is overriding what the plugin is doing. So if we open up our file explorer, we can see that this plugin actually generated this file called current theme.lua. So for example, if we go in here and we can see that it's still Groovebox. If we open that keybind again, select a theme, let's do this one, press enter, and we go to the file explorer again and go back into current theme.lua, we can see that it has been updated to a new theme. If we go to our color scheme, so what we need to do is comment this line out now, because we already have the theme switcher. We don't actually need to force permanent themes anymore. So if we save and quit out of here, actually, let's just save this first, because there's one thing that we still need to do. We need to require the current theme.lua. So if we go to our main init.lua file, and we're going to come down here and just write current theme. Now we're just going to save this, and let me just go back to current theme, switch the themes out again. For example, let's maybe try Groovebox this time, and let's open it back up. Okay, it is now switched to Groovebox. So if we quit right now and restart Neovim, we should see our color being persistent. So let's do that and open it back up. We can now see that it is Groovebox. If we try to do something else, Tokyo Night Night, enter, quit, and restart Neovim, the colors are now persistent, so the theme switcher is now working. Alright, the next one I'm going to add is called undotree. This plugin basically allows us to go through our undo history. Everything that we saved, we're going to be able to walk back through that. And here we basically call undotree, and then we have a function that runs this keybind. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and we're going to do lazy reload. Undotree is not installed, so let's open up lazy UI and go ahead and check for undotree. So capital I to install, and it has been installed. Okay, so let's save again and let's try to do this. So let's run lazy reload undotree again. Okay, so let's do leader U, and as you can see, we now have a UI on the left. If we go ahead and press Ctrl W and then H, we are going to be able to jump to the undotree section and start walking through this and see the different changes we made. So this is how undotree works, and leader U to just bring us back here again. What I want to do next is actually go to our file explorer, and I'm actually going to add a file called init.lua in here. This file is basically going to be for plugins that I don't have to configure much or configure at all. So we're going to add Plenary first. Because Plenary is one of those plugins that is going to be used a lot, I'm just going to add it in here. The next plugin I'm going to add is the nvim-tmux navigator. This plugin allows me to have this seamless navigation between Neovim splits and tmux panes. Now I'm just going to go ahead and save this, and let's just quit and restart Neovim. And our nvim-tmux navigator is being installed. And if we actually try to do leader U right now, which is basically our latest plugin that we added, which is undotree, so leader U, we should now be able to use Ctrl H to just jump to this side of the pane. And if we try to do a split screen with our tmux, I'm actually just opening up a new tmux pane. Now because I'm inside Neovim and tmux is open, I'm able to jump between these two panes by just doing Ctrl H and L. This works because of nvim-tmux navigator. This requires some setup with tmux as well to work properly, like you can see now. So if you want to know more about how I set up my tmux, you can check out this video. I will link it on the top right. I set up my tmux from scratch in that video, so everything you need to know about tmux is probably going to be in there. The next plugin I'm going to add is Harpoon. This allows for quicker file navigation and jumping between projects instead of always having to use a file explorer. So we're going to call this plugin and then enable equals true. You can turn this to false if you somehow want to disable this plugin. And we're going to add a branch. And then for the dependencies, again, the first one we have is Plenary. And I think that's all we need. Now let's go ahead and set up a function. I'm going to set up a local variable for Harpoon. So the settings that I have here are save on toggle and save on change. You'll understand more when I show you. Lastly, what we need to add are the key bindings. This first one here adds a file to the Harpoon list. This line here toggles the Harpoon quick menu UI, showing the files that we have added with leader A. These 4 key bindings are for jumping to a specific window using Harpoon. And these two key bindings are just for navigating to the next one in our Harpoon list and navigating to the previous one with Control-Shift-P and Control-Shift-N. So let me just go ahead and save this and restart Neovim. Harpoon being cloned and installed. Let's go back to Harpoon. If we go ahead and do leader A, we basically just added this harpoon.lua file to our Harpoon list. So we can open Harpoon list with Control-E. And you can see that we have harpoon.lua. Let me open up another file. For example, let's go to mini.lua. I'm going to add this file as well. So I'm going to do leader A. Let's navigate to oil.lua, leader A again. Let's do Control-E. And you can see that we have 3 files added in here. The first one is Harpoon, Mini, and then Oil. If we want to go to Harpoon, we can navigate to Harpoon and press enter, and it jumps us there. And for these key bindings right here, control-wise, just let me jump to the first window, I second window, and the third window. So I can just do that with Control-Y. I is the Mini, N is the Oil. So I'm just jumping between these 3 files with a key bind. If we press Control-E, we can rearrange these files. So if I just move Harpoon to the last one, and then :W to save that, we can then go ahead and open it back up, and you should see the changes as well. If we want to remove something from the list, we can just select them and then just delete them, save that, and it's just gone. Next up, I'm going to add some commenting support, especially for the TypeScript and HTML, JSX files. For comments, I'm actually going to use mini comment, so one of the modules inside the mini nvim. So let's set that up. So we're going to call the mini.comment. I'm now going to specify the version, and the dependency we need is nvim-ts context comment string. Now we're going to set up the function. I'm going to go ahead and disable the nvim-ts context auto command because we don't want anything to interfere with that. Now we're going to initialize the mini.comment and then override the default comment behavior using the dependency that we added. This is super useful for things like JSX or HTMLs or maybe even TSX. Neovim already has built-in comment support, but if you're someone who works with a lot of modern front-end frameworks or maybe some hybrid file types, this setup is going to make commenting code smooth and accurate. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. And let's restart Neovim again. 2 of our plugins are installed. Before we go and test out if the commenting works, we actually need to add Treesitter as well. This is required for this to work properly. So I'm going to go to my plugins, go here and add Treesitter. Again, we're going to return table. And then we're going to add Treesitter. Then we lazy load it, meaning it's only activated when you open or create a file. After installing or any updates to the plugin, we ensure that all the language parsers are then up to date with this command. Now we're going to go ahead and set up a function. We're going to import a Treesitter plugin and set it as a local variable called Treesitter. Now we're going to start configuring Treesitter. So I'm going to run treesitter.setup. This line enables syntax highlighting from Treesitter. We're going to add automatic indentation. Next, we're going to add a list of Treesitter parsers that we want to auto install. This enables incremental selection by saying enable equals true, and then we have the Keymaps set here. We use control space to select our incremental selection based on our syntax tree. So maybe like a variable and keyword, and then expand it to the next expression, or maybe expand it even more into a function, things like that. And then this line just disables the regex highlighting so that we avoid any conflict and only use the one that is of Treesitter. With that done, I'm going to go ahead and save this and restart Neovim. Treesitter is being installed, and we're going to navigate back to Treesitter. Everything should work now. So if we go ahead and open up a project, we might as well just look at our syntax highlightings as well, because that should now change and use the highlightings of Treesitter. So let's go ahead and try and comment this line out with GC, and you can see that comments out perfectly. GCC also does that. Okay, nice. So our comment is working as it should. If we now want to test out our incremental selection from Treesitter, so for example, if we are inside a function here and then we go control space again, control space again, so it works. There are still a couple more mini modules that I want to add. I think the next one I want to add is mini surround. This will make our life way easier when we have to surround something with a double quote or single quote. We're going to be able to do that very easily with mini surround. So inside our mini.lua, we're going to go ahead and add mini surround. And we're going to lazy load it again. Now we're going to add some options. I didn't really change anything much from these options because these are just the default options that the mini surround comes with. And these are the key mappings for mini surround. So if you want to change something, you would do it here in the mappings. And I'm going to show you really quickly how it works, but let's just restart Neovim first. Let mini surround download and install and go back to mini. How we surround anything is, for example, if I just select this whole thing with VI capital W and then I go SA double quotes, it surrounds the whole thing with a double quote. Like we see here with add, for example, we can also replace the surrounding quote. All we need to do is SR double quotes and then change it to single quotes. The same thing, SR single quotes bracket, SR curly to normal brackets, or SR closing bracket to, so you can change it to anything. And if you want to delete surrounding, then all you have to do is DS and then the double quotes. So that's the basic of how you use mini surround. The next one I'm going to add for the mini modules is the mini trailspace. Mini trailspace get rid of white spaces. So we're going to call that, do the same thing, and set up a function. We're going to require mini trailspace and store it in a variable. We then set up mini trailspace so that in normal buffers it is set to true. And then I'm going to set my key map. I use leader CW to clear the space. Let's just save and restart Neovim. Straight away, you can see that it shows up the white spaces as this red highlight at the end of the line. So if we have more white spaces, to get rid of that, I'm going to add this. This is basically a auto command, and it listens for when our cursor moves and then it clears the white space highlighting. So let me save and try to reload mini with lazy reload mini.trailspace. Enter. So now if we move our cursor, the red highlight goes away. Just to make sure that we don't have any white spaces, we can do leader CW to just clear any white spaces that we can't see. I'm going to add another one as well called the mini splitjoin. This plugin is going to help us toggle between the compact and expanded coding styles. Let's just set up a function. We're going to require mini splitjoin, store it in a variable. Now we're going to set it up. And then we're going to set up a key binding. The first one is for joining the arguments with SJ, and SK is for splitting arguments. We just restart Neovim, open it back up. Let's go back to mini. Now let's try to join this whole line with SJ. We can also do SK, and that just splits the brackets down here, as you can see. And if we go down here and do SK again, it then splits the inside of it, but SJ then joins it back. And if we go back up here and do SJ again, it then joins it back. We are now going to set up some UX UI improvements for Neovim. So open up our file explorer. Let's add some Statusline with Lualine.lua. I'm going to save and go into that. Again, we return a whole table, and then we're going to add Lualine. And the dependency for Lualine is the nvim dev icons, just to add some file type icons. Then we set up the function. We're going to call Lualine and add it to a variable. We're also going to grab the lazy.nvim status to show update counts in our status line. The next one we have here are the local colors that I defined for our Lualine. And then these are the colors for our Lualine for each Vim mode. So we have replace, inactive, normal, visual, and insert. Now comes the component parts. We're going to add a mode indicator to show us the current mode, like normal, insert, and then also add those icons with this. And then this right here displays the git diff, like the numbers of added, modified, or removed lines. And we also use like the nerd font symbols for this. And then here Of course, we need to display the current file name as well. So we have the file status as true, and then path 0 just shows the file name and not the full path. And then of course we need to show the git branch icon as well to show our current branch that we are in. And those are the components. Now we're going to call lualine.setup. This line enables the icons. These options define the custom theme and some visual separators, such as these vertical bars. And then we have these sections for the left side of the status line. So we have section A as mode, section B as git branch, section C as the diff and file name. And then the Lualine X is the right side of the status line. So it's going to show the lazy.nvim status updates in case we have any pending updates. And then we'll also display the file type. You can enable encoding and file format as well if you prefer that. Let me save and restart Neovim. Let Lualine install. Quit out of here and let's go back to Lualine. Okay, you can now see this beautiful line down here that we have, and it's showing us the Vim mode that we are in, and we can see the file name and also have the pending updates for our current plugins. So there's 8 of them right now that we need to update. It also shows the file type. So that is Lualine. Alright, so the next plugin we're going to add is incline.lua. This plugin just adds a file name to the top right of the screen. We can already see that with Lualine, but I'm going to add another one up here. So let's call it incline. So we're just going to add an option to enable this plugin. If you don't want to use this plugin, you can just disable it. The dependency we need is nvim dev icons. Now we're going to add a function. We're going to require the dev icons. We're also going to require the incline. Now we're going to call incline.setup. This first one shows incline on all windows. Then we're going to define a function. This function defines how each incline label should look for a window or a buffer. This line gets the full path of the buffer. This line grabs only the trailing part of the path, so we only get the file name. This line then checks if there is a file name. If there isn't a file name, it's just going to show up as this. Then we extract the extension from the full path. This then grabs the icon and the icon color for the file. If it doesn't know the file type, then it'll just give some default icons. This line checks if the buffer is being modified or basically like unsaved changes. This checks if the file is modified. Finally, we're going to return a whole label. So the first part shows the icon with its colors. This one checks if the file name is modified, it's going to be bold, otherwise normal. And here again, if it's modified, then we'll get this plus sign and also with the color. And then these are just spaces. Let me save and restart Neovim. Let's go back to incline. And now we can see that we have the file name and file type on the top right of the screen. If we go ahead and modify this file, we can see that we have the plus sign on top. The next plugin we're going to add is called Wilder, and it improves the command line autocompletion in Neovim. We're going to return a table. We're going to call Wilder. There are 2 dependencies that we need. The first one is the dev icons, and the second one is the fzy-lua native. We are going to set up a function as usual. Let's require Wilder. And then we initialize Wilder with these and tell it to activate when we see the colon, the slash, and the question mark. Now we are just going to define some custom highlight groups. So we're going to be configuring the custom renderer. This right here wraps the pop-up menu renderer with a border theme, giving it visual style and layout. So we have the width and the height reverse 0. We have the highlighters, which will apply to the syntax and fuzzy highlightings. And these are the actual highlight colors that we have set. And the border style is set to single. And that is Wilder. Let me restart Neovim. Let's navigate back to Wilder. Now if we go to the command line with colon, we can press tab through them or shift tab to go back through them. If we start typing something like lazy, you can see that the highlights also work, the green highlights. We can also do something like maybe lazy reload, and the different plugins of Neovim that we have, we can see them. So it gives you this visualization and then it just auto completes through them, so you can just choose which one you want to go with. Next up, we have something called the Showkeys.lua. I'm going to return a table. This plugin displays the key sequences you press in real time. So basically you can use it for screencasts or just like debugging Keymaps or something. So let's set this up. We're going to call this. And then this is the command for toggling the show keys. And then these are the options. So you can change the position, the max keys that it's going to show up. You want to show the counting of how many times you have pressed the same key. And then we have the window options. So these are just like the borders and stuff. Let me save and show you. Let's restart. Let's go back to Showkeys. Now in our command, we can run colon and do show keys toggle. When we press enter and we start typing something, you can see on the bottom right, we have the keys showing up just inside of Neovim. Let's go back to our plugins. And I'm going to add something called the Vim maximizer. This plugin lets us maximize our current split. So let me just set it up and show you. I'm going to call Vim maximizer and then set up the key binding. Let's restart. So for example, if I do lspconfig to split my screen, and on the right side, if I go to like harpoon.lua and I do something like sm, you can see that it maximizes this side of the screen. If I go Control L, we go back to the left screen, and I can do that again with sm. And we can also run se. If you remember, that equalizes our split. I'm going to start adding some Git support for our Neovim configuration now. And down here, I'm just going to create a file called gitstuff.lua. I'm going to save that and go into there. And the first plugin I want to add is the Vim fugitive. And then we are going to add a function. This line lets us group related commands together so we can manage them easier. And then we're going to assign another variable to auto command so we don't have to keep typing this function. This sets up an auto command that triggers when a buffer is displayed in a window. We'll use this to add key mappings only in the fugitive buffers. We then attach it to my fugitive and then apply this auto command to all files. We'll set up a function now. So in here is where we're going to start setting our specific key mappings. This checks if you're actually inside the fugitive buffer. We then get the current buffer number and then define our options for our key mappings down here. This binds leader uppercase P to always get push. Then this binds leader P to always rebase. And finally, leader T sets up tracking for a new branch. Let me save and restart Neovim. Let's go back to Git stuff. So I just realized I forgot to set up a key binding to call fugitive. So inside our first main function here, we're just going to go ahead and add a key binding. And this sets leader GG to activate fugitive. Let me now save and let's reload fugitive. And now if we go to a Git repo with leader GG, so with this we can see our main branch. We can also see the unstaged file. And in fugitive, if you want to stage a file, you can do S and that changes it to staged. If you still have something that is unstaged, then it will still show up on top here. It's kind of hard to demonstrate, but then if you want to unstage a file, you can do U, that unstages it. If you maybe want to check a diff, you can do an equal sign and it will check for the diff. And if you do equal sign again, then it takes it off. If you don't remember any keybinds, you can do G and question mark. This should give you a list of the things that you can do with this. And with LazyGit, we can do leader LG. This is basically the LazyGit UI, and you can jump through the files with the 2. You can come to the local branches with 3, go and check your commits with 4, and then J and K to just move around these. And if you want to know the key bindings, you can press the question mark. It should show you everything that you can do with LazyGit. I won't go too deep into LazyGit here or any Git integrations in this video. In the same file, I'm going to add another Git plugin, and this one is called gitsigns. This plugin shows Git changes like added, modified, or deleted lines directly inside Neovim, and you can also do so much more. You'll understand more once I set this up. Also going to lazy load this. Then we're going to add some options. This sets up a function that runs when gitsign attaches to a file or a buffer. And then we're going to add a package.loaded.gitsigns And now I think we should store this in a variable. So I'm just going to say local getsign. And because when we set our keymaps, we have to set so many different modes, I'm going to add a helper function so that we can just set a key map using the word map. At the same time, I do think that I should just change this to something easier like gitsigns, so gs maybe, and save that. And now we're going to start adding the key maps for the gitsigns. This right here is for the stage and resetting hunks with leader gs and gr, and this is for the ones in normal mode. But we also need for the ones in visual mode because sometimes we want to select and then run the command. These are for staging the whole buffer and then resetting the whole buffer. We then have the undo stage hunk and then preview stage hunk with leader gu and leader gp. These are for toggling the line blame. So we have leader gbl and leader g uppercase b. We have the ones for diffing, so leader gd and leader g capital D. We're also going to add some navigation, and these are for navigating the hunks, which you'll see more here when we save and reload the file. Lastly, this should allow us to use it in visual mode or pending mode. For example, like DIH to delete a hunk or VIH to visually select a hunk. Now let me save and restart Neovim. To show you an example of these, I'm going to jump to a Git repo. If we have these changes right here, and I go ahead and do leader gs, it then stages that hunk, and you can see the color changes here. If I then go ahead and do leader gu, it then unstages that hunk. If, for example, I want to reset these spaces I have here, I can do leader gr. Even if I come up here and I do leader gr, it resets that as well. If I do leader G capital R, it resets everything we did here. We can toggle leader GP to preview the hunk. We can check the blame by doing leader GBL. We can also toggle current git blame by doing leader G uppercase B, and it shows that. Toggle leader G capital B again, it just goes away. We can also diff this by doing leader GD. To quit out of it, we can just control Q on one of these. There's still another plugin that I want to add for Git integrations, but I think this file is getting a little bit too big. So what I'm going to do is go back to our plugins, and I'm going to create a file called worktree.lua. We're going to save that, go into here, save it again. This plugin basically speaks for itself. It adds supports for Git worktree, so it just allows us to create a worktree inside of Neovim and also allow us to switch between different worktrees. If you're someone who uses a lot of Git worktrees, this is just going to be very handy. Let's add a URL for this. And then the dependencies we need are Plenary and Telescope. We're going to call a function now. The first thing we're going to do is require the Git worktree. Then we call Git worktree.setup. Here we tell Telescope to load Git worktree extension. So we can then use Telescope to manage our Git worktree UI. These are just the key bindings you should know if you're going to be using this plugin. And these are the key bindings. So the first one, we have leader WL. This allows me to open up a Git worktree list and switch between the worktrees. And this one is leader WC. This allows me to create a Git worktree branch within Neovim and switch directly to that branch. It is a little bit buggy at times, but it does work. And that should be it. Let's save and restart Neovim. To demonstrate this a little bit, we're going to go into our repo. I'm not sure if I have Git worktree in this repo. So let's try and run leader WL. Okay, so I do not have any other worktrees. So if you have other worktrees, you'd be able to search through them and also like navigate through them with Control J and K. If we try to run leader WC and we try to create a branch, so let's call it feature. I'm going to press enter and it's going to ask us the path to the subtree. So we're just going to say feature/feature branch, I guess. Press enter. Okay. And as you can see, we have already created a feature branch. We are actually inside of it right now. If we open up leader WL, you'll see that we have the main branch and the feature branch. So if we actually check and see if we have this branch, and yes, we do, we have a directory called feature. So let's go into that. And we have another one called feature branch that we created. So let's navigate in. And if we check, we should have everything we have on the main branch also on here. So that's how this plugin works. if we open up leader WL, and if we want to delete this branch that we created, we can just press Ctrl D. That deletes the branch, and then we have to also open leader WC, go here, and also delete it from here. And that's basically how it works. A little complicated, but if you take some time, you can get used to it and it should just work fine. Alright guys, we are almost done with the configuration, and next up is the syntax and the language features. So this part of the video is going to be a little bit more complicated now. So if you feel like you don't understand any of these things, it's totally fine. Let's get started. So first, I do want to add some tailwind support, but I do not have any auto completions or anything yet. So first, what I'm going to do is go to the plugin section, and then I'm going to add something called the tailwind tools.lua. So let's do that first. I'm going to go into here. We're going to paste in the repo. That's one of the things we need for this to work. And then the other thing we're going to add is the nvim colorizer, the nvim treesitter. We're going to have an empty option table. Now set up a config function. We're going to require the colorizer and store it in a variable. We're going to do the same for the tailwind colorizer as well. Now we're going to set up the nv-chat colorizer. We're going to enable the tailwind CSS color parsing by saying tailwind equals true. Then we are only going to activate colorizer on specific front-end files. And this right here configures the tailwind autocompletion colorizer to use a color square that is 2 character wide. Let's just save this first, because in order for this thing to work, we need to set up the nvim completion as well. So let's save and restart Neovim. Let those install. Okay, let's go back. The one thing that we can check right now is the background colors that we added for tailwind. So if we try to go into a repo, and let's just go to one of the pages. So what we need to do is we need to run colorizer toggle, press enter, and then you should see the background colors now show up. But if we want it to show up automatically, we need to add something to our config. So I'm going to go ahead and add this. This should allow the color to show up automatically now. Let's go to one of our projects and restart that. Let's navigate to one of these, and we can now see that the color automatically shows up. There you go. So that is working. Now we're going to start adding the nvim auto completions. So what I'm going to do now is open the plugins and go down here, add nvim-cmp.lua, save that, go into here. I do want to say something first, because this part of the video is actually very complicated, and for me to explain everything inside the nvim-comp.lua, it deserves a whole nother video of its own. So this nvim-comp.lua is only possible because of this guy right here. Be sure to check this guy out. He explained everything about this nvim-comp config. He goes into more detail about how all of these things and the custom functions and everything work. If I just explain everything in this setup, it's going to take way too long for this video to finish. So yeah, let's just set this up now. Okay, so we'll start by again returning a table. We're going to define nvim-comp, but it really isn't that useful by its own. So we're going to have to add some dependencies. The first one, comp buffer, provides suggestion based on words found in the current buffer. The comp path offers completion for file system path. LuaSnip is basically a predefined piece of code that you can quickly insert. Comp LuaSnip connects nvim-comp to LuaSnip so that snippet suggestions can appear in the completion menu. Friendly snippets is pre-written snippets for various programming languages. It's basically a collection of snippets. The nvim treesitter is not directly an nvim-comp source, but it is often used by LSP servers to provide better code understanding, and that in turn improves LSP-based completions. The LSP kind adds visual icons to the completion menu, making it easier to distinguish between different types of suggestions, functions, and variables. The tailwind colorizer adds the color previews for tailwind in the completion menu. The second section that we're going to add initializes the required modules and defines several helper functions that are going to be used throughout the configuration. So set up a function. The first one is comp. Then we also load LuaSnip using pcall for safe loading. Then we also have LSP kind. And finally the colorizer. Now we are going to start adding the helper functions. This first one is a helper to convert key combinations into a format Neovim understands. This table right here defines the custom icons for different types of LSP suggestions, so you can go ahead and change the icons if you don't like these. Then we have these 4 custom helper functions to determine the cursor's position and context within the buffer, and they are used for smart tabs and backspace logic. These functions will be later on used for the smart tabs and backspace logic. This one calculates the effective width of tabs considering both soft tabs and shift width, which are the Neovim options. The next one we have here is the smart backspace options. These are custom functions that give you smarter backspaces, you could say, which we will use in the key mappings when we set them below. And then we also have the smart tabs, which is basically a smarter version of tabs. And again, it will also be used in the key mappings below. And these right here, these are simple wrappers for selecting the next or previous item in our completion menu. And they also have a fallback function if the menu isn't visible. This one is a bit complicated. It is a custom function to handle confirming a completion, and it includes logic to decide whether to insert or replace text based on the content after the cursor. This line tells LuaSnip to load snippets from the VS Code format. We are done with our second section, and for the third section, this is basically the core configuration of nvim-comp. So what we're going to do is call the comp variable and do a .setup. This line shows how the completion is displayed. For menu, it's just going to show the completion menu. For this one, if there's only one suggestion, it's going to show the menu anyway. And for the no insert, we will not automatically insert the suggestion if there's only one. So you have to confirm it. Next is the window decoration. This just customizes the appearance of the documentation window and also borders for the completion menu. This tells nvim-comp how to expand a snippet when one is selected, and it uses the luasnip.lsp expand to do that. We then define the sources from which nvim-comp should pull completion suggestions. The order matters because the sources that are higher in the list are typically prioritized. So you see we have the luasnip for our snippets, the nvim-lsp for suggestions from our LSP server. We have the buffer for the words in the current buffer. We have path for file paths. And then we have the tailwind colorizer for the tailwind completions. This is where we define the key mappings for interacting with nvim-comp in insert mode, and we're going to use the customized mappings instead of the default presets. This one calls the custom smart backspace function for intelligent backspace behavior that we added before in our helper functions. Then we have Control B and Control F mapped to scrolling the documentation window. We then have Control J and K, which are the mappings to choose for the next or the previous completion item. But then J and K might not be enough, so you could add things like Control N and Control P. And then I'm also going to add the arrow keys. So we should now be able to use Control J and K to move up and down in our completion menu, use N or P, use down and up arrows as well. I'm also going to add Control Y to confirm the currently selected completion item using this custom function that we created earlier, if you remember, this function right here. If we press GD, we jump back to this function that we have here. This was the function we called earlier, and we're using it right here. Let's say you want to do the same thing, but instead of pressing Control Y to confirm the completion, you can also press Enter if you want to use that. All you need to do is just copy this and change the inside of here to CR. And you should be good for using enter as completion. Next, we have the shift tab. This is also another complex mapping. So right here, we say that if the completion menu is visible, then select the previous item. If the completion menu is not visible and you're inside a snippet where you can jump backwards, for example, to a previous placeholder, then it will jump there. If you are leading in a white space, for example, at the beginning of a line with only spaces, then perform a smart dedent using smart BS, which is a smart backspace function we set up before. And for this one, if you're in a white space but not leading indent, then it will perform a regular smart backspace, or else it's just going to go to the fallback function. Then we have another one for tab. This right here checks if the completion menu is visible. If there's only one entry, we confirm it, so right here. But if the completion menu is visible with multiple entries, then we're going to select the next item. Or else if the completion menu is not visible, you can then expand a snippet or jump within a snippet. But if you're in a white space, it will insert a smart tab using the smart tab custom function, or else it triggers the completion with comp.complete. Next up is the formatting. This formatting defines how the completion items are displayed in the menu. Then we add the custom icons based on the LSP kinds table. This is for the menu tags like buffer or LSP to indicate the source of suggestion. Here we call the lsp.conf format to apply the VS Code style icons. We then also need to apply the tailwind colorizer formatter specifically for LSP suggestions. And lastly, we need to return the vim_item, and that should be it for this section. I think I've accidentally added formatting in the mappings section, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, okay, we're gonna have to move the formatting section out. So this whole formatting section, we're gonna move this out here, and that should be okay now. Yep, okay, so we have the formatting section outside. Okay, that's perfect. Let me save that. The final thing we're going to add for our nvim-comp is the ghost text experimental feature. So I'm just going to come down here, and right outside the comp.setup, you can press the % to jump between them. So right outside the comp.setup, we're going to add the auto command to control when the ghost text feature is active. So this whole thing right here is responsible for ghost text. To explain this ghost text section in short, it sets up a auto command that runs every time you enter the insert mode or move your cursor while you're in insert mode. And these auto command calls a function that intelligently decides whether to show the ghost text based on where you're typing, whether it's going to be inside a word or at a word boundary. And this just makes the ghost text less distracting. To enable ghost text, we need to go all the way up to nvim-comp.setup. So right here, we're going to add something called the experimental, and then we're going to enable ghost text equal true. If you do not want to enable ghost text, you can just change this to false, and that should just disable ghost text. And I'm going to save this first. Now I'm just going to quit and restart Neovim just to see if we get any errors or if there's anything we need to fix. Okay, it looks like it failed to load the nvim-comp plugin. There's an error at line 297 near formatting. Let's go check that. Let's go back to nvim-comp. Let's go to line 297. I think the error is coming from syntaxes. Yeah, I forgot to add the comma at the end of mappings. Let me restart again. And there we go, it's working. All our plugins and dependencies are being installed. So let that run out. Let's go back to nvim-comp. Okay, just to test this out, let's see if our auto completion works. Although there's still some things that won't work because we still need to set up LSP, but let's check the basics of it. Okay, as you can see, we now have a bunch of auto completion. We can use Control J and K, N for the next, P for the previous, and also arrow keys are working. Well, Control Y, that accepts it. Enter to accept this. That works too. Okay, so I finally found one of the docs that we can test the scrolling on. So you can see we have a scrolling on the right here in our documentation preview. So if I just go ahead and do something like Control B and F, we should be able to scroll through the doc straight away. Okay, our scrolling is working as well. Let's test something like map. Let's press enter to accept that. I can change this to random. When I press tab, I can change this again to something else. Maybe something like, I don't know, item. And when I press tab again, as you can see, it goes to the next and the previous. I think we are now done with our completion. Let's just recheck everything and make sure we have it all set correctly. I think I forgot to add a key bind for aborting the auto completion. So let's just add that really quickly. I'm going to save now. So I use Control E for abort. If we quit and restart Neovim, so usually when we type something, you can see that it changes when we select through them. For example, if we just escape out of this, it's still going to be there. So what Control E does is if we select this again and we press Control E, then it aborts us to what we type at first. Okay, now we should actually be done with completion. Okay, next up, we're going to start setting up our LSPs. So let's navigate to the File Explorer. For LSP, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it LSP /. I'm going to save that, and we're going to navigate into this LSP folder. We're going to create a file called mason.lua. Mason is a package manager specifically for Neovim's ecosystem, and it focuses on the easy installing and managing LSPs, formatters, linters, and debuggers. Let's return a table, add the Mason package, set lazy to false. We're going to add the following dependencies. We're not going to use blink, so I'm going to leave that as it is. Now we're going to set up a config function. Let's import Mason. Now let's call the mason.lsp config. And we're also going to call the Mason tool installer. We're also going to require the LSP config, the completion nvim-lsp, and the capabilities as well to enable auto completion. By getting the default capabilities from comp nvim-lsp, we ensure that the LSP server knows Neovim is capable of handling completion requests. This right here initializes Mason with mason.setup, and the UI and icon settings, as you can see, for installed we have a tick, for pending we have an arrow, for uninstalled we have a cross. Next we're going to do mason lsp config, and then we're going to go .setup. We're going to add this list, and this list specifies the name of the language servers you want Mason to ensure are installed. When you open Neovim with the config, Mason will check if these servers are present and install them if they're not. You can also manually install a language server by doing mason install and then the name of the language server, but these are the ones I want installed automatically. So we're also going to set the automatic installation to true, and then down here we're going to configure the Mason tool installer, and these are also the following formatters that we are going to add for Mason. Now we're going to add the custom language server handlers, and this may vary depending on what you need for your usage. So I'm going to go mason lsp config.setup handlers. This is where we provide the instructions on how to set up different language servers once they are installed by Mason. This right here is the default handler, so any language server installed by Mason that doesn't have a specific handler defined will use this one. And it also passes in the capabilities that we discussed earlier to enable the standard LSP features. Now let's add the specific handlers. So the first one I have is emmet.ls. So with this you can see that in each handler you call the setup function for that specific language server, just like this. And again, we pass the capabilities, and then we also have the file types. The next one I'm going to add is for the Lua ls, and again we have the capabilities and the settings for the Lua language server. Here we tell the language server to recognize Vim as a valid global variable. Then we have the call snippet as replace. This configures how the server handles snippets during completion. This just tells the Lua language server where to find the additional Lua files to analyze. And then I have another emmet language server. I don't remember why I added this one as well, but I have two of these now. And I think that this one just has something that the first one didn't have. That's why I have it in here too. Then we have the deno ls as well. And then lastly, we have TypeScript. And I think we are now done with the Mason config. So let me save this. But we're not going to quit yet, because if we remember correctly, we have the plugins folder, and then we have the LSP that we are in right now. So we actually need to go back to our lazy.lua config, come down here, and what we need to add now is we need to import the sethi.plugins.lsp as well. Now what we're going to do is save all and quit, open back up Neovim. Mason is being installed, including all the other plugins that we need, and you can see that Mason installed a bunch of languages on the bottom left. Okay, so everything seems to be working. Let's go back to Mason. Now let's set up the next one. We need to add a plugin for TypeScript auto tag as well. If you don't use TypeScript, you can just skip this step. But I'm going to go ahead and go to Treesitter. And then at the end of this file, I think I'm going to add the plugin here. I'm going to comma that. So I'm going to add the auto tag plugin in our treesitter.lua. We're going to call this plugin. We're going to tell it to look for these files, then set up a function. And this is where we set up our auto tags. So for the options, we have enable close true, enable rename true, close on /false. Then we have the per file type. So we have HTML enable as true and TypeScript enable as true. Save and reload Neovim. Okay, and we're good to go. Back to Mason. All right, let's move on to setting up our LSPs. So go to our file explorer, and inside our LSP folder, we're going to come down here and add the lspconfig.lua. We're going to save this, go into here, return a table. Now we're going to add the nvim-lsp config. We're going to lazy load this plugin. We're going to add the dependencies, and we do not need blink, so let me remove that. This first one connects the LSP completions to nvim-comp completion engine. This one adds file operation support like rename, move, and all that to integrate with the LSP. And this just improves Lua development experience, especially for Neovim config files. Create a function. This creates an auto command that triggers when LSP client attaches to a buffer. We are then grouping it under the user LSP config for easy management. Then we're going to create a callback function. We're going to add the local ops to set keymaps to be buffer local and silent. And then we need to go up here and add EV here as well. Now we're going to start adding our keymaps. This maps G_R in normal mode to open telescope LSP reference picker. And then the ops.description just shows us the description, and then we just add it at the end right here. This next one is G_D jumps to the declaration of the symbol under the cursor using the built-in LSP. And then GD shows the LSP definition. GI shows the implementations of the symbol. GT shows the type definition. Then I have leader VCA triggers code action like quick fixes in normal and visual modes or any imports. And then leader RN triggers a symbol rename, so we can rename any variable and it will change those variables. Next we have leader D, which shows the diagnostics for the current buffer via telescope. And then leader D opens a floating window with diagnostics for the current line. And then we have Shift K to show hover documentation for the symbol under the cursor. And then we have a key binding to restart our LSP server. Finally, we have Control H that shows us the function signature help. Next, we define the custom icons for diagnostic signs in the gutter for errors, warnings, hints, and other infos. Then finally, we have to apply the diagnostic signs to the configuration globally. And this should now work. So let's save. And let's quit and restart Neovim. So let's try our key binding out. If we go to this callback and do G_R, we get the LSP references, and you can see that the different callback function that is available to us, and we can just jump there to get more information about it. We can do Control 6 to go back. If we try to do GD, it brings up the LSP definitions. If we go to one of these options and do GD, okay, it jumps us up there. That's working. GI for the LSP implementations. Let's do GT. Takes us to the type definition. Leader VCA. Code actions seems to be working just fine. Let's try and make some errors here. And if I do leader D, it brings all the errors. The preview isn't updating because I think I haven't saved the file yet. Let's save the file and try to run this again. Leader D. And there we go. What about leader D? That's working as well. We can delete that. Shift K. Shift K seems to be working. What about leader RS? Okay, the highlights are gone. They should be back in a moment if this works. Okay, this works. We also have Control H. So I'm going to quickly go to Mason and let's go over here and go into insert mode. Now try to do Control H. Okay, the signature seemed to be working. Let's go back to LSP config. And I think we are done with the LSP config. Oh, and I just realized that I added the neodev right here, but I'm actually not calling it down here at all. Let's actually remove this and then go back to Mason. Let's add it into Mason instead. And then right down here, we should go require neodev.setup. Let me type correctly. And let's save and restart Neovim again, because we weren't really calling neodev in our LSP config. So I think it's better off to just add neodev right here and just let neodev do its thing for the Lua LS or the Lua LSP. Let's restart. We are good to move on now. Our LSP are done. We have Mason set and the diagnostics are working. All right, great. We're almost done. Let's keep going. The next plugin I'm going to add is noice.lua. We're going to save and go into here. The only thing I want from noise.lua is the messages that I get when the LSP is done loading. So I don't really want to use the noise command line at all, but in order to use the messages for LSP, I somehow need to set the noise command line as well. So I might as well just set up this plugin anyways. And if you guys want to use the command line of noise, you can go ahead and do that. But for me, I'm going to have it disabled. We're going to call the noise URL, give it an event of very lazy. I'm going to add an option called enables equal true. We're going to add some dependencies. This is basically a UI component library for Neovim. So noise requires NUI to work. I don't know what you call it, but yeah. Again, we're going to set up a config function. We're going to add a local variable called noise and then require noise. And we're going to do noise.setup. The first thing I'm going to configure for noise is the command line itself. So these, if you're wondering how I configure these, you can go to the GitHub of noise and look at the options available for configuring. So currently I have the command line enabled as false, but I'll demonstrate it to you and show you how the true version works in case you want to use it. Now we have the view options. These configure the menu appearance, like the position relative to the editor, centered horizontally, window highlight groups, and all that stuff. It's basically preference, so you can go ahead and mess with these if you want. But the setting that I currently have works best for the LSP messages to display and also for the command line to be floating in the center if you want to use the command line. Next, we add the LSP progress. So this is what is going to be responsible for showing us those LSP messages as well. This allows me to basically modify my messages based on patterns. So you go ahead and filter messages based on what you want them to show. I just kept these to default. I didn't do anything with them. And this just tells noise to skip those messages so that it doesn't clutter the screen too much. And then down here, I'm going to say messages enables equal true. We have the health checker equals true. Pop-up menu equals true. Signature also equals true. Okay, now let's try and restart this and see if the LSP messages work. Okay, so now if we navigate back into noise, what you should see now is the messages loading our LSP on the bottom right of the screen. Okay, there we go. Okay, so that works. Now what I mean is that the command line has now disappeared and is now like literally into Lualine. So you can't literally see what I'm typing. So that's the only problem with this. The only way to fix this, I believe, is that's why we need to turn the messages to false. And I'm going to save. Let's just quit and restart Neovim again. Let's go back to noise. You can see that we have this LSP loading, but at the same time, our command line is now back. So this is what I was talking about if you don't set it up manually. I have to disable messages in order to get this to work. But if for some reason you want to use the noise command line, this is how it looks like. So I'm going to enable this true and then go ahead and lazy reload and noise. Now, if you try to do the colon, you actually get the command line in the center of the screen and you can start typing any commands that you can think of, like lazy, reload, and whatever it is. And the funny thing is the wilder completion is still on the bottom left, but I mean, it still kind of works if you want to use this noise command line. And also the other thing is if you do colon and then you change to H, that goes to help mode, right? And when you go space, the icon also changes on the command line right here. So that is also great. That is because I have all these set up right here. But if you don't want to use this, you can turn it off by making it false. And I personally, I'm not going to use this. I'm just not used to it. So I'm just going to go back to the old one. But I'm just letting you know that you have that option if you want to do it. Let's go to the next one. All right, now we're going to add some formatting. So I'm going to write formatting.lua. We are going to return. I'm going to call the conform nvim. So that's what we're going to be using for formatting. Lazy load this plugin. Set up a function. Require conform and store it in a variable. Now we're going to do conform.setup. Then we add our formatters. The first one I'm going to add is markdown toc. This will only run if the buffer contains this string. Next, I have the markdown lint. So this will only work when it checks and find that there is a markdown lint in the current buffer. This will ensure that it only formats when the linting issues exist. We're going to come at the end of our formatter, add a comma, come down here. And these are just formatters by file type, and most of it is just prettier. If you like format unsafe, you can go ahead and uncomment these lines. And then right down here, I'm going to go ahead and configure the individual formatters. So the first one is the prettier one, and I'm going to use tab 4 for prettier. And then next, we have the configure the shell script formatter to indent with 4 spaces. Lastly, we have a keybind to run the manual formatting with leader-mp. We are done with formatting, so let's restart Neovim. Let's go back to conform and test this out. So if we, for example, just move everything here, and what we can do is leader-mp, that formats everything. Now I'm going to add some linting to our plugins. So let's go down here and create a linting.lua file. We're going to save and jump into this file. We're going to return. We're going to call the nvim-lint. This is the plugin that I'm going to be using for linting. We're going to lazy load this plugin as well. Then we're going to write a function. We're going to require the lint module. And we're going to add the lint auto group. This creates a new auto command named lint to organize lint related commands. This line gets the reference to the eslint-d linter configuration from nvim-lint. Here we define which linters to run for each file type. This section customizes the command line arguments passed to eslint. Don't warn about the ignore files. Output results in JSON format. Read inputs and provide the current buffer's file name to eslint. And then this function returns the current buffer's file name. This create auto commands that trigger linting on buff enter, on buff write, which means after writing to buffer, and then on leaving insert mode. Lastly, this right here maps the leader L in normal mode to manually trigger linting on the current file. And then in order for the linting to actually show up, I'm going to navigate back to our LSP, and right down here in the vim-diagnostics.config, we need to specify directly what we want the diagnostics to show. So there are 3 things we need to add. The first one is virtual text. So this allows the ESLint diagnostic messages to show up, and you can disable or enable underline, that's up to you. And then we also have the update in insert. I have that set to false, so it doesn't get too annoying. Now what I'm going to do is save and quit all. Let's open back up Neovim. Let's navigate back to linting. Now to check if this linting actually works, I'm going to navigate to one of my personal projects, and let's go to one of the files. Okay, we can immediately see the ESLint working. And if we try to maybe write something wrong over here, okay, that also shows up. Okay, so linting seems to be working fine. If you are going to be using this ESLint and somehow you find issues with ESLint not working, then you need to make sure first of all is go to Mason, and down here at eslint-d, the version should always be at 13.1.2. I'm not sure if it's fixed or not, but this version seems to be the version that doesn't give any problems with ESLint. But I think the latest update to ESLint was that if you do not have the ESLint RC file, it's just going to show up as error because it doesn't recognize any config file for ESLint. So that's totally normal for ESLint now, apparently. If you don't have the ESLint config in your project, then obviously ESLint is not going to work. Sometimes I'm working on a project and there's just way too many linting errors that shows up. I really don't like it sometimes. So what I actually have is, if we go to our keymaps, all the way down at the bottom, I have the toggle LSP diagnostic visibility, which means I can always go leader LX to hide any sort of diagnostics. So if we go back to our project, if I just want to hide this, I can do leader LX, and that just hides the ESLint messages. But then on the left hand side, you can still see the sign that there is something wrong with this line right here. That is just something that I added into my config. Let's go back to linting, and then we'll move on to the next one. What I want to add next in my plugin is the trouble.lua. Let's create that and go into here. This plugin provides a easy to use diagnostic list and sort of like a quick fix window for Neovim. Let's add the URL. I'm going to add the dependencies. So we have the dev icons for the icons, and then we have the full key to do comments that integrate really well with trouble, which also integrates really well with snacks. This option allows the trouble window to automatically focus when you start interacting with it. This defines the trouble command to open the trouble window manually. These are the keybinds for trouble. Let's quit and restart Neovim. Let's navigate back to trouble. And let's try this out in a different project. And then if we try to do leader XW, it opens up troubles like that. As you can see, if we press enter, it collapses, and then we can navigate down here and look through the trouble that we have. And it also moves as you go around here. For example, if we select this one and then we press enter, it then jumps us up to that location as well. And if we Control J, we can come back down. And to quit out of trouble, you just press :Q or just press Q. What we triggered just now was for the entire workspace. Let's do leader XD for only the current buffer. Out of all this whole workspace, it seems like this buffer is the only one that has problems, apparently. With leader XQ, we can toggle the quick fix list inside trouble, and snacks also work really well with trouble. So if we open up snacks file searcher with leader PF, and we type for something like works, we press tab, that marks this file. If we search for something else like the nav bar, we can press tab, and that marks 2 of that file now. Now what we can actually do is send this to a quick fix list by pressing Control Q. I'm going to quit out of here, and with trouble, I can now do leader XQ, and that should open up the trouble quick fix list. Leader XT. This shows up every single marked comments that we have with to-do comments. So it looks through every single file that you have these comments on. This next one is called the emmet. You might be familiar with this. We're going to return. Emmet is like a plugin that provides the quick wrap HTML tags and abbreviations, and you can really do a lot with Emmet if you know how to use it. This key binding actually allows me to quickly wrap the current word with an Emmet abbreviation, speeding up the HTML editing. So we're just going to save that. So for the Emmet abbreviation, I can do things like div.container and then go like header plus section dot main plus footer. And you can see our autocompletion knows what this is. So I'm going to go for the first one, and I'm going to press Control Y to accept or enter. So Control Y, and then you can see just like that, we have all of these right here. Even better, with the plugin that we just added, if I go ahead and select all of these, and I do something like leader XE, it asks me what kind of abbreviation do I want to put in. So if I say something like another div, and then I press enter, then it just wraps this whole thing with another div, as you can see. And maybe add something like header. I press enter, and there you go. I can select this line. I can do leader XE, wrap that inside a p tag, press enter. It's that simple. Now we're finally going to add some image support to Neovim. So we're going to create a file called image-support.lua. We're going to return a table. And now we're going to call the image clip.nvim. This is going to be the plugin that we're going to use to add images and paste images into our markdown files in Neovim. For this plugin to work, you need to go to your terminal and you need to install png paste by doing brew install png paste. If you haven't already, make sure you do that first. We are going to set the event to very lazy. I'm going to set the key binding to leader PI to paste the image in our markdown files. And then these are just the default options that they provide in their GitHub repo. Actually, it isn't just that. I forgot that I have this custom function right here that allows me to basically add an image into my markdown files, which I use as an Obsidian vault, by the way. And then when I paste an image, it will automatically ask me if I want to put the image into this path that I have set here, because in my Obsidian, I basically have a path to where all my images will go to. And so that is doing the same thing here. So you might not need this, depend on how your setup is configured. And that's it. That's basically our image support. Before this can work, we have the image support from Snack. So let's navigate back to Snacks, go all the way down here, and let's uncomment this image out. Now we're going to save this. Again, quit and restart Neovim. So I'm going to navigate to one of my .md files. I'm going to navigate to the browser, and I'm going to copy an image from there. And if we try to test this out by doing leader PI, it should ask us where we want to place the file path. So I'm currently using an Obsidian Vault, and this is basically my path to where the image is going to be put into. So I'm going to name this image test image. I'm going to press enter, and we're going to call this image. And there we go. You can now see that the image also rendered on the screen automatically. The other thing I can do here is if I use my mouse and drag an image, for example, I'm just going to drag this image and I'm going to put it in here. It's going to ask me where I want to put it, and it just gives me the prompt. So what I'm going to name this is random image, press enter. And now if we type something like image 4 and just give it a little time, it should show up. Although I should say that sometimes dragging an image from the browser doesn't work because it hasn't been like converted to JPG or PNG or whatever. So make sure most of the images you drag are actually downloaded onto your system before you drag them in here. So if your terminal supports image renderer, then this is going to work just fine. The final plugin I'm going to add is called the render markdown, and this basically enhances the rendering of markdown inside Neovim. So we're going to call the URL enabled equals true, and there are two dependencies that we need, which is the nvim Treesitter and the nvim dev icons. Next, we're going to add a init function, and this is where we define our 6 background colors. You can go ahead and set your own colors here depending on what you like. These are the 6 highlight groups for different heading levels. They have the same foreground color but just different background color. The next thing we need to add are the options. So we're going to add the headings. We have the disable signs, and these define the icons for different headings. And these are just a list of highlight groups as a background, and these are the foregrounds. For code blocks, we have disabled sign with as block and write pad 1. This enables rendering of list bullets in markdown list, and then that's it. That's basically our render markdown. So now we are going to save this, but we are not going to restart just yet. First of all, we need to navigate to our file explorer, and this is where the after plugin folder comes in. So we're going to head all the way back to our first directory that we created, jump into here. We're going to create a folder called ft plugin. We're going to go right in here, and the next thing we're going to add is the markdown.lua, just like that, as a file. Now what are we doing in here? What we're setting now are the specific settings for the markdown language. This is how you would go about setting each specification for different languages separately. Inside the after/ft plugin directory is where you do that. We're going to set the vim.op local to a variable called set. For markdown, I have 3 settings. The first one wraps text at 80 characters, and then it enters into a new line. I have enable spell check, and line break also set to true. There's one more thing we need to add for markdown, and that is the highlight groups. If we don't add the highlight groups here, the highlight will not show up properly in the markdown. So we're going to add the same local colors that we have before so that they match each other. And these are just the vim commands to enable those colors. What we're going to do now is just save all and quit Neovim. And let's go back in. So everything should work now. If you navigate to any markdown file, and for example, I'm just going to go to mine. So in my markdown file, I can now go heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, and so on. And it changes according to that. If I put my cursor on it, we still have that highlight. For example, if I want to type something like a bullet point, that works as well. And we can also add checkboxes by doing dash and then open bracket space, close bracket. And that's actually already a checkbox. And let me do the same. And if we put X in here, we actually get a checkbox that is ticked out. Also, if I start typing something and then at the end of the line, it's just going to go ahead and set me down once it reaches the 80 character that we have set in the after plugin. So I'm literally not even pressing enter. All I'm doing is pressing space and just typing like I usually would. And then it'll just notice that and kick it down to the next line. And there's actually so much more you can do with render markdown. These are just some of the examples that I'm showing you. There is actually another plugin called Markdown Preview, which lets you preview the markdown that you've written in your markdown file into a browser or an explorer. But I don't actually really need to use that because I use Obsidian on the side. If I need to preview anything, then all I need to do is just make some changes to this file. And when I save that, you can see that it immediately shows up on my Obsidian as well. And I can go into read mode in Obsidian, of course. I can scroll around in Obsidian and I can get out of read mode, all that stuff. Things I edit, things I add in here, they're going to be added into Obsidian as well. I'm going to go ahead and save again. And you can see that it immediately shows up in Obsidian. So there's absolutely no delay at all because this markdown file on the left side is basically in the same directory as where the Obsidian vault is. The only difference is that when you scroll through your markdown file, it doesn't actually scroll with you, which I don't think is that big of a deal anyways. I don't actually need to add a markdown preview at all. I'm okay with this working just the way it is. Alright, so the final plugin that I'm going to add is called nvim-ufo. Let's go into this file. I'm going to return. This plugin provides an advanced code folding for Neovim, improving on the built-in folding. The dependencies that nvim-ufo requires is the promise async. Then we are going to set up a function. Then we call the nvim-ufo.setup. This function returns a list of folding providers. This will use Treesitter if the Treesitter based folding is available, or else it's just going to go ahead and use the indentation based foldings as a fallback. This disables the highlight timeout after opening a fold. These are some folding options that we have. The first one enables code folding globally. This one sets the fold column width to 0. For this one, we set a fold level to a very high number, so the folds are open by default. And this sets the initial fold level when opening a file also very high to keep the folds open. Next up are the keymaps. I'm just going to write a comment down that ZA is by default used for folding. Then we have these two other key binds. The first one is Z capital R. This opens all the folds that we have, and Z capital M closes all the folds. Let's save and restart Neovim. To test this out, I'm going to put my cursor on the config function ZA. It folds this function. If I do Z capital M, that folds every single thing it can in this whole buffer. If I do Z capital R, that unfolds everything. That is all I have for you guys in this video. And it's been about 2 hours now. So, I mean, thank you so much for sticking around if you're still here at the end. The link to my configuration will be down in the description below. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I will catch you guys in the next one.